After my husband died in a car accident, I was deeply trapped in depression. However, my in-laws blatantly accused me of being a flirtatious vixen who was always flirting with men all day long. Under the tremendous psychological pressure, I chose to jump off a building. Only after my death did I learn that all of this was a scheme by my in-laws to embezzle the insurance money. They even declared at my funeral, if she really loved my son, she should have committed suicide to follow him long ago. After being reborn, the system said that I would get a succubus buff. In this way, many handsome and wealthy men would come to save me. I stared at my father-in-law's back and asked him thoughtfully, "Can you give this buff to others?" One for the third time. The system asked me, "Host, are you sure you want to give the buff to someone else?" For the third time, I answered him, "Yes. Please give the succubus buff to my father-in-law, Richard." The system took a look at the over 50-year-old uncle sitting on the sofa picking his feet. Bald, with yellow teeth and a big belly. He was silent for a long time and finally told me trembling lie. "Host, as you requested, the buff has been transferred to your father-in-law, Richard." Sure enough, as soon as the system finished speaking, I saw the two words succubus appear above my father-in-law's head. "Oh, host, why did you give it to him?" "Why? Of course it was for revenge. Living this life again, I will make them pay the price. Too, in my previous life, my husband died in a car accident and got an insurance compensation of 1 million yuan. My husband and I had been in love for many years and finally got married. But just 1 year after getting married, we were separated by death. I couldn't bear the blow and was depressed all day long. Finally, I was diagnosed with depression. My in-laws stayed on the pretext of taking care of me. I thought they were kind-hearted, but I didn't expect that a few days later they showed their true colors. As long as they saw me talking to a man, they would scold me with all kinds of ugly words. They smashed my mobile phone and didn't allow me to call my male colleagues. They smashed my cosmetics, calling me shameless and asking who I was dressing up for all day long. They cut my clothes, saying that it would prevent me from going out to flirt with men. Within half a month, the whole community knew that I was a flirtatious vixen who went out to flirt with men right after my husband died. Under the great mental torture, I finally stood on the rooftop and chose to jump. After my death, my soul floated in the air and saw my father-in-law and mother-in-law laughing happily at my corpse. She's finally dead. It's not in vain for our efforts during this period. Great. The insurance money and this house are all ours. We will leave them to our nephew in the future, and let him support us in our old age. So, all of this was planned by them. Even at my funeral, in the face of my parents, who were in tears, they talked a lot of nonsense. She wanted to die herself. Who can she blame? If she really loved my son, she should have committed suicide to follow him long ago. I hate them. I hate them so much. I hate their malicious hearts, and also hate myself for being too weak at that time. Giving them an opportunity. If I could start all over again. Just as this thought flashed through my mind, suddenly I heard a mechanical prompt sound. The system has been bound. Then I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, I was reborn on the day when I jumped off the building and was also bound to a system. The system told me, "Host, you will get a succubus buff. In this way, men will be unconditionally infatuated with you, and will be jealous and fight for you." I was silent. The painful lesson from my previous life made it hard for me to trust others easily. Instead of leaving my fate to others, it is better. In an instant, I had an idea in my mind. System, can the succubus buff you mentioned be given to others? The system got stuck. Give it to others? It's not impossible. Good. I pointed at my father-in-law sitting on the sofa picking his feet. Then give it to him. After the buff was transferred, the system asked me why with a choked voice. I winked at him and played a little trick. "You'll know soon." 3. As soon as I finished speaking, my mother-in-law rushed out and threw the cut-up sling dress in front of me, saying viciously, My son is dead. What's the use of keeping this dress? Are you going to wear it for other men? I looked indifferently at the pieces of the dress. This dress was the last dress my husband bought for me. In my previous life. When I saw this scene, I completely broke down. I couldn't even cry while holding the dress. The unfounded accusations and scoldings echoing in my ears became the last straw that broke the camel's back, forcing me to stand on the rooftop. But not this time. I interrupted her. Mom. You're right. My mother-in-law didn't react for a while and looked at me stupidly. The Buddha said, all things are impermanent. Where there is birth, there must be death. Why should I be obsessed with life and death? I was full of emotion and spoke with cadence. Just like giving a speech, Zach's departure made me enlightened. The mortal world is meaningless. I took 2 steps forward, held my mother-in-law's hand, and looked sincere. Mom, if you want to cut the clothes in the wardrobe, just cut them. If you want to smash the cosmetics on the table, just smash them. I no longer need these worldly things. When I get the monk's certificate, I will become a monk. I don't want the money and the house left by Zach. You two can use them for your old age care. After that, I recited Amitabha and turned around and left, leaving my in-laws stunned in the living room, looking at each other. The next day, I bought a wooden fish, Buddhist beads, incense candles, and Buddhist scriptures online, showing a pious attitude towards Buddhism. I turned a deaf ear to the scolding and focused on reading the Diamond Sutra. This made those 2 old people at a loss. They gathered together all day long, chattering, not knowing what malicious tricks they were thinking about. But I knew that soon they would have no time to care about me, because the succubus buff took effect. For overnight, father-in-law suddenly became popular. When he went out for a stroll in the morning, from the old man in a wheelchair to the young man rushing to the subway, they all stared at him, and people took the opportunity to say hello to him and chat a few words all along the way. When he got home, father-in-law shook his head while rubbing his cheeks. The people in the city are not as cold as rumored. They are very enthusiastic. I almost laughed my face off after going out for a walk. Mother-in-law gave him a sidelong glance. You're just being a nuisance. At your age, you still go out to show off. Richard, I warn you, if you dare to be improper with those sluts, I'll tear you apart. Father-in-law retorted unconvinced. Who are you slandering? All those who greeted me were men. On my conscience. I'll be a puppy if I lie to you. Just as he finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. It was Leo from next door. With an obsequious smile. Richard, I'm going fishing later. Do you want to come? Father-in-law's eyes lit up. Sure. But I don't have a fishing rod. I have one. You can use it as you like. Leo's expression was still a little shy. As long as you are willing to go. Father-in-law was just about to agree when a fat old man squeezed in through the crack of the door. That won't do. Richard, didn't you promise me to play chess with me this morning? Father-in-law hesitated a little. He seemed to have said it casually. But wasn't it just a polite remark? He didn't even know what the fat old man's name was. Leo was unhappy. Hey. Richard has already promised me. The fat old man also put on a straight face. Nonsense. Obviously. I was the first to make an appointment with Richard. As soon as they disagreed, they glared at each other and immediately started fighting. Fishing first. Chess first. Father-in-law quickly tried to stop the fight. Let's talk it over calmly. Well, let's go together. We can fish and play chess at the same time. Only then did the 2 men let go of each other and snorted. For Richard's sake. We'll go together. Mother-in-law frowned and asked me, is it my problem? Why do I feel a little disgusted? I pinched my thigh hard to keep from laughing. I don't think so. But father-in-law is so popular. He made friends so quickly. Sure. Father-in-law had a proud look on his face. With my character, quality, and personal charm, I'm the social butterfly in the community. Mother-in-law picked up a broom to shoo him away. All right. All right. Hurry up and go. Don't make a fool of yourself. Father-in-law happily followed the two old men out the door, and didn't come back until late at night. Mother-in-law was so worried that she called the police. Originally, the police said that since the disappearance time did not exceed 48 hours, they would not file a case for the time being. But mother-in-law wailed in the police station, "My son died not long ago. My old man can't have another accident." Hearing her say this, the police were moved with compassion, and agreed to help her check the surveillance. The surveillance showed that father-in-law went fishing with Leo and the fat old man and didn't leave until 5 p.m. After having dinner together, the three parted. Father-in-law and Leo didn't return to the community, but turned into an alley and disappeared from the surveillance. The police drove me and mother-in-law to that alley. As soon as we got out of the car, we saw father-in-law running out disheveled, and looking panicked. Mother-in-law finally breathed a sigh of relief and scolded, "You old devil. Have you become wild-hearted? You don't even come home so late." As soon as she finished speaking, she noticed several hickeys on father-in-law's neck and a tooth mark on his chest. There was dead silence on the spot. Even the two policemen didn't dare to say a word when they saw mother-in-law's face. Father-in-law caught his breath and, seeing the police, burst into tears. "Comrade police, you must uphold justice for me." Mother-in-law was so angry that her hair almost stood on end. "Richard, I was worried at home for nothing. While you were having a good time here. Where is that vixen? I'll skin her alive today." The rest of her words stuck in her throat because Leo showed up at the entrance of the alley with a satisfied look. "Richard, you can't deny me after getting out of bed. You were so enthusiastic just now." Seeing mother-in-law, me, and the police, he couldn't say the rest of his words either. Father-in-law's face flushed bright red. "Comrade police. It was he who. Arrest him quickly and sentence him." Now anyone with eyes could see that father-in-law had been sodomized by Leo. I heard the police gasp and whisper to his colleague, "Such heavy taste." I went through all the sad things in my life in my mind to keep from laughing out loud. Leo immediately cried out his innocence. "No. Richard. You didn't resist at that time either. I thought." Father-in-law lowered his voice, gritting his teeth. "You said we were going to have some fun. I thought you were going to find me a woman. Who knew it was you yourself?" Mother-in-law regained her composure from the shock and let out a howl as she scratched Leo's face. "You beast." Leo counterattacked without showing weakness. "Richard told me that you are a shrew and he doesn't like you at all." The police quickly stepped forward to stop the two. "Hey. No fighting allowed." Mother-in-law dragged the police and cried and made a fuss. "Police. You can't let this beast go." Father-in-law huddled in a corner, covering his buttocks, with tears in his old eyes. The police were a little embarrassed. Well, the victim of rape can only be a woman. For men, at most it can be sentenced as indecent assault. I noticed that these two policemen hardly looked at father-in-law and asked the system in confusion. It seems they are not affected by the buff. The system gossiped with great interest. Of course, the two of them are full of righteousness. The buff can only affect those who are lecherous in the first place. So that's how it is. The last bit of guilt in my heart disappeared. The crime of indecent assault can be sentenced to at most 5 years. I pretended to sigh. "And if this matter spreads, how can you two elders still live here?" Hearing this, Leo immediately said, "Hey, comrade police. This is not indecent assault." As soon as I touched him, he went limp. I didn't force him. The police took a look at the father-in-law and involuntarily showed a disgusted expression. "All right. Stop talking. We'll know after getting an injury examination." The father-in-law glanced at the mother-in-law guiltily. "Let's forget it. How shameful it would be if it got out." I exclaimed in my heart. Could it be that he really was willing? He can hardly be unwilling. The system's voice sounded very proud. The buff has already transformed his body. No matter how unwilling he is in his heart, he can't resist a man's touch. I couldn't help but shiver. Fortunately, I didn't accept this buff. The mother-in-law's face turned green, and then red. I didn't expect that she could still learn to change her complexion at this age. The police originally wanted to make big matters small and small matters nothing. So they took everyone to the police station to sit down and mediate. After a round of heated arguments, Leo compensated 50 yuan, and the matter was thus settled. When leaving, Leo said in a strange tone, "Richard, your one-night stand is quite expensive." The mother-in-law had a heart attack for a long time and pointed at the father-in-law while trembling. "Richard, your family must have done something evil to produce such a male vixen like you." Since then, the father-in-law had been behaved for a while. He stayed at home and refused to go anywhere, as if there were fierce monsters outside the door. But after only half a month, he couldn't sit still any longer and was thinking about going out all day long. The system said that this was a side effect of the buff. If the father-in-law didn't come into contact with men for a day, he would be fidgety. When the mother-in-law saw that the father-in-law was still going out to play with those men, she secretly followed him. Seeing the covetous looks in those men's eyes, the mother-in-law immediately became furious and made a big scene, scratching the faces of those men. In the evening, a big fight broke out in the community owners group. The wives of those men whose faces were scratched heard about this matter, and were not happy. They said in a strange tone in the group that there was a crazy woman in the community who would beat men when she saw them. The mother-in-law fought back, without showing weakness. "Bah! Am I wrong to beat them? It's they who are shameless and lust after my old man. Otherwise, would I beat them?" This sentence was like Germany's blitzkrieg on Poland, and Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. A world war thus broke out. "My old Wang just played cards with your old man a few times. How did it become that he was coveting your man? Your man has that tendency. My husband is not a pervert. It's just that my old Xiao is kind-hearted and told me not to haggle with you. Otherwise, I would call the police to arrest you today." There were also those who liked to watch the fun and asked, "I'm very curious how extremely beautiful the person coveted by everyone looks." I sent the father-in-law's photo into the group, and the owner's group was silent for a while. "He looks like a normal person at least." "All right. Don't argue with her. She should be a bit crazy. Quite pitiful." The mother-in-law was as angry as a boiling kettle. She whistled like a police siren while arguing with a group of people in the group. Unfortunately, fighting against many with one, she was finally defeated. The mother-in-law was so angry that she threw her mobile phone. When she turned around, she saw the father-in-law smiling and typing on his mobile phone. She snatched it over and was about to throw it to vent her anger when she saw that the father-in-law was making an appointment with a man about where to play tomorrow. Her hair stood on end at once. "Richard, have you forgotten about Leo? How dare you still be ambiguous with these men? You've completely disgraced me." The father-in-law was also unhappy for having his mobile phone snatched away. He pulled a long face and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? Am I talking nonsense? Let Xiaoan judge. One of us is abnormal." Suddenly, the war burned onto me. I picked up my water cup and slowly withdrew from the living room. Well, I still have evening prayers to do, so I'll leave first. Then I quickly turned around and slipped into the bedroom. Through the wall, I could still hear the mother-in-law roaring. "So good at attracting men. Richard, I really suspect that you are reincarnated from a vixen." Since then, the father-in-law and the mother-in-law had quarreled more fiercely. Every time after the quarrel, the father-in-law would slam the door and leave, and the mother-in-law would cry and scold at his back. This actually gave me some inspiration. One day, after I came back from worshipping Buddha in the temple, I pulled the mother-in-law and looked around, then asked in a whisper, "Is Dad not at home?" The mother-in-law snorted and said resentfully, "There are so many vixens outside. How could he be willing to come home?" I pretended to sigh. "The vixen might be someone else." "What do you mean?" The mother-in-law looked at me suspiciously. "I met the abbot when I went to the temple to worship Buddha today. The abbot said that there was an evil spirit on me and our family was not clean." The mother-in-law was half believing and half doubting. "Really?" I patiently guided her. Dad is already old and has an ordinary appearance. Moan. You tell me. How could those men be so obsessed with him? There must be something wrong. Are you saying that Dad has been possessed by a vixen? Very likely. I took out a string of Buddhist beads. This was given to me by the abbot. He said that this string of beads had been consecrated in front of the Buddha and was most sensitive to those dirty things. If Dad is really possessed, he will definitely feel uncomfortable when wearing this string of beads. Just as we were talking, the father-in-law pushed the door open and came in. What are you whispering about? I winked at the mother-in-law and handed the beads to the father-in-law with a smile. I met the abbot today and got a few strings of beads consecrated in front of the Buddha for safety. Dad, this string is for you. The father-in-law had never believed in these superstitious things. It's all a trick for the old monk to cheat you out of your money. This thing must have cost you 1,000 or 800. You women are just good at wasting money. The mother-in-law took the beads and put them on the father-in-law's hand. The child has good intentions. Stop talking nonsense and put it on quickly. The father-in-law reluctantly put it on. But in the next second, he suddenly threw the beads on the ground and held his wrist while gasping in pain. What the hell is this? It hurts so much. He moved his hand away, and there was a circle of round dot-like scars on his left wrist. Just like a monk's ring scar. The father-in-law glared at me angrily. What a lousy thing. Look what it has done to my wrist. Throw it away quickly. After saying that, he angrily went into the room to find a band-aid. The mother-in-law looked at me in astonishment. Could it be that your dad is really possessed by a vixen? Shh. I made a gesture for silence. Make sure he doesn't hear it. Otherwise, both you and I will be in mortal danger. My mother-in-law was on the verge of crying out of anxiety. What are we going to do? I heard the abbot say that the fox demon will digest the yin qi absorbed today at the Z hour 11 p.m. 1 a.m. At that time, it is most defenseless. As long as someone stabs a knife into the fox demon's heart, it can be killed. My mother-in-law was a little hesitant. Stabbed into the heart. Will your father be all right? It won't hurt, father-in-law. I deliberately added fuel to the fire. It's better to do this earlier. If the possession lasts too long, I'm afraid father-in-law will lose his life. Sure enough, my mother-in-law became worried. I deliberately shook my head. It's a pity that the abbot has gone to other places for exchange and study. He won't be back until a month later. I hope father-in-law can hold on. My mother-in-law's face changed several times. And finally she returned to her room worriedly. The system gave me a thumbs up. Host. Brilliant. I took out the remote control. By simply installing an electric shock device in the rosary beads, I made my mother-in-law believe that my father-in-law was possessed by a fox spirit. System. There will be some fun to watch next. 9. I had already installed a pinhole camera in my in-law's room. As soon as it got dark, I turned on the camera and kept an eye on my mother-in-law's movements all the time. After my father-in-law went to bed, my mother-in-law tossed and turned all the time. And finally she simply sat up. She didn't turn on the light, but just stared fixedly at my father-in-law, with her eyes full of struggle, until she saw the red mark behind my father-in-law's ear. Her face suddenly turned cold. It was almost 12 o'clock at this time. I saw her get out of bed, open the door and go out. I quietly slipped to the door, opened a crack and looked outside. My mother-in-law went to the kitchen and took a knife, muttering to herself, "I'm doing this to get rid of the demon. Kill the fox spirit. Kill the fox spirit." Then, as if she had made up her mind, she pushed open the bedroom door. The next second, a shrill scream rang out in my father-in-law's room. "Ah, you're crazy." I put down my mobile phone and stretched. It was time for me to show up. I pretended to be awake and by the noise and rushed into my father-in-law's bedroom. "Dad." "What happened?" My father-in-law huddled in the corner in horror, his shoulders covered with blood. My mother-in-law was holding a knife with her back to me, repeating, "Kill the fox spirit. Kill the fox spirit." When my father-in-law saw me, he was like seeing a savior. "Xiao In, Call the police quickly. Your mother-in-law has gone mad. She's chopping me with a knife. My mother-in-law suddenly turned her head. Maybe she got splashed with blood when she cut my father-in-law. The bright red blood drops fell on the floor one by one along her jaw. Her eyes looking at me were calmly insane. Get out. Don't disturb me while I'm exorcising the demon. Without saying a word, I went out and then dialed 110 and 120. When the police and the doctor arrived, my father-in-law had been cut a few more times. But fortunately, none of them were fatal wounds. He was taken to the emergency room by the 120 ambulance. The police handcuffed my mother-in-law and took her away. All the way, she still struggled and muttered, "I'm not ill. Let me go. Let me kill that fox spirit, and make her leave my husband." When I was the only one left in the room, the system asked in puzzlement, "Host, why did you call the police? If your mother-in-law had killed your father-in-law, wouldn't your great revenge have been avenged? Wouldn't that be too easy for him?" I sneered. Later, I learned that in my previous life, it was my father-in-law who came up with the idea of forcing me to death in order to obtain the insurance money and the house. Because my husband was not his son at all. The nephew he and my mother-in-law mentioned was his real son. Back then, my father-in-law and my husband's uncle had children almost at the same time. My husband's uncle was more far-sighted, and went into business early and made a great fortune, while my father-in-law gave up halfway and accomplished nothing. My father-in-law was jealous of my husband's uncle, so he took the opportunity to swap the children and sent his own child to live a good life. My husband once told me that since he was a child, his parents had either beaten or scolded him, and it was only better when he grew up. At that time, I was still wondering how there could be such parents who were so harsh on their own children. It was not until I jumped off the building and died and my soul was floating in the air that I learned the secret from the ecstatic in-laws. Even my husband's car accident was arranged by them in order to get the money and the house, and then recognize their real son. So, how could I let them off easily? I will make their lives a living hell. 10 After being arrested, my mother-in-law did not cooperate with the investigation, but kept clamoring to see me. Helpless, the police could only call me. When I arrived at the police station, as soon as my mother-in-law saw me, she screamed loudly, "Shout on. Tell the police quickly that I didn't kill anyone. I was just trying to drive the fox spirit out of your father." I comforted her, "Mom, I believe what you say, but the police don't. They are going to charge you with attempted murder, and you will have to serve more than 10 years in prison." My mother-in-law was frightened. "What should I do? I can't go to prison. If I go to prison, the children in your cousin's family won't be able to take the civil service exam in the future." "Mom, I've thought of an idea for you." I looked around and lowered my voice. "Act a little crazier. I will claim that you are mentally ill. People who kill during a mental illness don't have to go to prison, let alone just wounding their own husbands. Then you will go to the mental hospital for a while first. When the storm has passed, I will pick you up and take you home." Hearing that she didn't have to go to prison, my mother-in-law immediately nodded. Good. 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 In fact, without her acting a little crazier, just based on her performance last night, the police had already determined that she was not quite normal. I also asked a doctor to issue an appraisal report, so the police directly threw my mother-in-law into the mental hospital. On the day of admission, my mother-in-law held my hand reluctantly. "You must pick me up and take me home as soon as possible." "Don't worry," I promised wholeheartedly, watching her walk into the ward, looking back every few steps. "Rest assured, you will never be able to walk out of here again." When the father-in-law heard that the mother-in-law had been admitted to a mental hospital, he snorted coldly. "Serves her right. That damn woman actually cut me. Ouch. It hurts like hell." I quietly looked around. The old man hadn't noticed that many male patients in the ward were looking at him in a very strange way. Sure enough, someone attacked the father-in-law at night. I took the opportunity to make a big fuss. In order to calm things down, The hospital arranged the father-in-law in a VIP single-patient ward. People living here are either rich or noble. The father-in-law was complacent, thinking that he had got a bargain. And I was already inquiring about the backgrounds of the patients on this floor with the system. Under the coincidences I carefully created, the father-in-law met the richest person on this floor of the ward, a rich second generation named Benjamin, who was said to be worth nearly 100 million. Benjamin was originally a good-for-nothing second-generation heir. He got drunk and molested passing girls and also injured the girl's boyfriend, causing quite a stir in public opinion. So his father stuffed him into the hospital to avoid the limelight. As soon as Benjamin saw the father-in-law, he was bewitched by some buff. His lecherous eyes were glued to the father-in-law, and he couldn't move at all. Then he began to pursue the father-in-law vigorously. Brand name clothes, watches, and cars were sent into the father-in-law's ward like flowing water. The young nurses in charge of the bed were dumbfounded. They got together all day to gossip and also sighed that a 30-something won and a 50-something zero. Was this really love? At first, of course, the father-in-law refused. But he couldn't resist the large amount of things Benjamin gave him. So he reluctantly complied. The two of them were like a bolt of lightning hitting the ground. The young nurses, who unfortunately witnessed it all, shouted that they were blinded. Seeing that the time was almost right, I picked a lucky day and rushed to the hospital to catch them in bed. Father, how could you do this? It's simply immoral. I put on a look of extreme distress and reprimanded. If mother knew about this, how sad she would be. The father-in-law stuck his neck out and said stubbornly, "That crazy woman cut me. What feelings do I still have for her?" Benjamin protected the father-in-law behind him and glared at me fiercely. "Are you Richard's daughter-in-law? If you have something, come at me. Don't make things difficult for Richard." I wasn't afraid at all and looked him straight in the eye. "Come at you? Fine. I'll find a recorder to expose you to and see if your family's stocks will fall tomorrow. Shout on. Don't be like this." As soon as the father-in-law heard that it would affect the money, he quickly softened. "Let's talk it over." I pulled out a chair and sat down. "If you two break up quickly, I'll pretend this never happened." Benjamin immediately grabbed the father-in-law's hand and looked at me like the Queen Mother of the West who breaks up lovers. "Impossible. No one can separate us." His tone was so emotional and his expression was so disgusting. "Father, do you think so too?" The father-in-law lowered his head and didn't speak. Of course. Following Benjamin, he could enjoy good food and drink and get whatever he wanted. People always find it difficult to go from luxury to frugality. He had seen the life of the rich. So how could he be willing to go back to an ordinary life? I pretended to be disappointed. "Mother got a mental illness because of you. As soon as she was hospitalized, you came out of the closet and had an affair. If this spreads back to our hometown, I wonder how you will be able to hold your head up. Cut it out. It's just a matter of money." Benjamin took out a bank card from his pocket and threw it at me. "Here is 3 million. Consider it as a breakup fee for that crazy woman. Tomorrow she and Richard will go through the divorce." I took the bank card and thought for a while. "Fine. But we need to sign a contract." The system kept clicking its tongue. "Host. Well done. This old man can actually be sold for 3 million. Yes." I was laughing wildly in my heart. This money came too easily. After signing the contract, I took the photos of the father-in-law and Benjamin fooling around to visit the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law was full of joy, thinking that I was going to take her out of the hospital. After seeing the photos I handed her, she was completely dumbfounded. How could this be? I folded my arms and looked at her with contempt. "This is the truth. Richard doesn't want you anymore. His lover gave me 3 million to buy your divorce certificate from Richard." "Impossible. Don't believe it? Richard and I also signed a contract. Do you want to see it?" I took out my phone and put the fresh contract photo in front of her. The mother-in-law dodged the phone and looked through the photos one by one. At the end, she stared at me, her eyes almost popping out. "I won't get divorced. I won't sign. It doesn't matter. I spread my hands and said nonchalantly, Richard's lover has found a lawyer to make a civil agency power of attorney. So I will sign the divorce agreement on your behalf. Suddenly, the mother-in-law went crazy-like and grabbed the doorknob above the ward. Let me out. Let me out. I'm not crazy. It was this hateful woman. She framed me. Let me out. This commotion alerted the doctors and nurses. After a shot of tranquilizer, the mother-in-law was put in a straitjacket and tied to the bed. Unable to move, she murmured, I'm not crazy. Let me go. I stood beside the hospital bed and looked down at her. Everyone who comes here says they're not sick. Who would believe it? Lillian, you can stay here until you die. Why are you doing this? The mother-in-law stared at me viciously, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. I lowered my voice and said in her ear, You killed Zach and then wanted to force me to death. Just to have someone take care of you in your later years? Look, you live here with no worries about food and clothing. Isn't your goal achieved? How do you know? When the mother-in-law saw that her plot had been exposed, she trembled with fear. You're not Xiao-An. Who are you? Who am I? I deliberately made a charming pose. Don't you still want to kill me? The mother-in-law was so frightened that her soul almost left her body. She shouted at the top of her lungs, Fox spirit. You're a fox spirit. Someone. There's a monster. Come and kill the monster. But even if she screamed at the top of her lungs, no one would believe her. It's so satisfying. Gradually going mad is the best punishment for her. 14 After a series of operations, father-in-law and mother-in-law divorced smoothly. Perhaps out of guilt, father-in-law gave up all his property, including my husband's insurance money and the house in his hometown. All these are mine now. After everything was settled, I told the system that I could give up the buff. Yes, the system secretly told me that actually I could give up the succubus buff at any time. Even if the current user of the buff was not me, I could still apply to give it up. It can be imagined that when father-in-law lost the succubus buff, all of a sudden, it is said that after Benjamin woke up and saw father-in-law lying in his arms, he was so disgusted that he didn't eat for 3 days. Immediately, he called the security guards to pack up father-in-law and throw him out of the villa. Father-in-law clung to the front of the villa and wept, Benjamin, you scumbag. You were the one who flirted with me first. Now I divorced for you. But you, well, you got tired of me and kicked me away. Are you even human? Benjamin was so ashamed that he wished he could kill himself by hitting his head against something. He kept muttering that he must have been possessed by an evil spirit to fall in love with this toad. He was afraid of losing face and that his neighbors would know that he had an affair with father-in-law. So he quickly called 110, saying that father-in-law was disturbing the residence and asking the police to arrest him. Seeing the police coming, father-in-law had to leave. Benjamin thought of the contract with me and thought that I had conspired with father-in-law to cheat him out of his money. He called me and threatened to get back the 3 million yuan. I curled my lips with a cold smile. Benjamin, this contract was signed between me and Richard. This 3 million yuan is the divorce compensation he gave to my mother-in-law. It has nothing to do with you. If you want to get this money back, then go find Richard. Benjamin was so angry that he went to ask father-in-law for money. Father-in-law thought that Benjamin had changed his mind. As soon as they met, he wanted to snuggle into Benjamin's arms, which scared Benjamin so much that he ran away in a hurry. Unexpectedly, father-in-law followed him all the way home, and still wanted to enter the house. Benjamin was furious and said that he was just unlucky, and that the 3 million yuan was wasted. He asked the security guards to beat father-in-law up and drive him out, warning him not to appear in front of him in the future, or he would beat him every time he saw him. After being beaten, father-in-law knew that Benjamin had completely abandoned him and no longer dared to get close to him. But he had nowhere to go. So finally he could only sneak back home. As soon as I opened the door when I got home, I saw father-in-law lying on the sofa righteously. You're back. I'm hungry. Hurry up and cook. 15 I glanced at him. Are you leaving by yourself? Or should I call the police to ask them to take you away? Father-in-law jumped up and scolded me when he heard this. This is my home. My son bought this house. Why can't I live here? I took out the contract from my bag. It says here that in the divorce, you left the house clean. The house and money don't belong to you at all. You are trespassing now. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Father-in-law's eyes rolled, and his tone softened. Shao on. Don't be impulsive. We are all family. Let's talk it over. I rolled my eyes. Who is your family? Father-in-law shamelessly came closer. Shao An. I'm here this time to remarry your mother-in-law. Look. So he was coming back for a second chance. Ugly as he was, he had such beautiful dreams. Remarry? I raised my eyebrows and sneered sarcastically. I'm sorry. Mother-in-law has been diagnosed with mental illness. She is now a person with limited capacity for civil conduct. Therefore, she can't get a marriage certificate. Even if you go to the Civil Affairs Bureau, you will be rejected. Father-in-law looked confident. You're right. In that case, then my divorce from her doesn't count either. Right? You were the one who signed it. So this was his plan. Fortunately, I was well prepared long ago. You're wrong. When handling the divorce, Benjamin asked the lawyer to prepare the documents and let me be Lillian's civil agent. Look, there is Lillian's signature here, with the lawyer and the attending doctor as witnesses. I looked at father-in-law with a smile. So I have the right to sign the divorce agreement on behalf of Lillian. Father-in-law, who could hardly read, naturally couldn't understand what I said. His face turned cold, and he said viciously, "Are you really so unfeeling? Okay. Just wait. I'll sue you in court." Fine. I'll wait for the court summons. I stood by the door and made a gesture of invitation to him. But now, you, get out. Or I'll call the police. 16 Not long after, father-in-law illy sued me in court. I hired the best lawyer and stated that it was father-in-law who had an affair first and was willing to leave the house clean and get divorced. After asking my mother-in-law about her will when she was sober, and with the witness of the lawyer and the doctor, she signed this civil agency document, and I handled the divorce procedures on her behalf. Father-in-law threw a tantrum in court. Your Honor, this is all a trick she made up. She worked so hard to set up the scheme just for my property. I'm an old man, without a house or money. How can I live? After looking through the evidence I submitted, a judge asked him, Plaintiff, do you have any evidence to prove that you were not voluntarily divorced at that time? Father-in-law, I can swear to God. The judge and the lawyer, finally. The judge rejected father-in-law's request to revoke the divorce. I won. 17 Father-in-law, who had no hope of remarriage, could only wander the streets and make a living by picking up garbage. The system asked me if I wanted to take further revenge. I shook my head. Death was too easy for him. He had seen the world of the rich and enjoyed a life of luxury and dissipation. Now, once he fell from heaven to hell, this feeling of being worse than death would make him suffer like being tortured day and night. Only in this way can I avenge my husband and myself. But one night, when father-in-law was picking up garbage, he met Benjamin and his cronies coming out of a bar. Father-in-law was convinced that I had conspired with Benjamin to plot for his property, so he angrily went forward to argue with Benjamin. When Benjamin saw him, he was reminded of that unbearable past. Seeing his father-in-law pestering endlessly, in a fit of anger, he raised his fist and hit him. After taking a few punches, his father-in-law fled in a hurry. Benjamin chased after him relentlessly. The two of them ran to the middle of the road. A truck passed by and couldn't brake in time. The two of them were crushed into mincemeat together. Hearing about this matter, I also felt a bit of regret. It was really too easy on this old guy. I went to visit my mother-in-law and told her the news of her husband's death. She had gone completely mad. After hearing this, she just clapped her hands with a grin. The vixen is dead? Good riddance. Wonderful. He's dead. And the money and the house will all be ours. Then we can go find our son. With the money, our son will surely recognize us. Then the three of us in the family can be reunited. A few days later, the doctor in the mental hospital told me that my mother-in-law slipped onto the top floor and noticed and jumped off. Today is the anniversary of my husband's death. I came to the cemetery with a bunch of flowers to visit him. I took a tissue and gently wiped the photo on the tombstone, and told him everything about his father and mother from beginning to end. Zach, now you can rest in peace. A gust of wind blew by, and the smoke from the incense candles suddenly billowed up. In a daze, I seemed to see my husband smile at me. I also smiled. The dark clouds above my head dispersed, and the sun shone down. Everything was just right. I stood up and waved at the tombstone. I think it's time for me to embrace a new life too.